Hi. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It's always strange doing these because no one ever answers back. So thanks for joining in, and this time I'm going to be talking about publishing HTML5 games to the Windows Store. And I get asked this a lot because I've been doing so much lately in the HTML5 gaming space, and a lot of that is how can you monetize your games. And while there are no real, great answers, I mean, doing game development is kind of like the lottery. Sometimes you win and, you get paid very well for your game. It's incredibly hard, though, to play the lottery when it's very difficult to distribute your game. So traditionally, people think of HTML5 games as being kind of landlocked into the browser. And what I want to talk to people about is that it's actually really easy to bring HTML5 games over to Windows Store and monetize them on Windows 8 as if they're native. So with that in mind, again, you had a quick introduction to me, but my name is Jesse Freeman, and I'm a Technology Evangelist at Microsoft focusing on Windows 8 gaming, especially on HTML5 games, because I've just been doing so much web dev over the past few years. And this is my email address and my Twitter handle, and my job at Microsoft basically is to help people build games. If you're in New York, I can actually help you in person. And if you're online, please feel free to send me an email if you have any interest or if you have a game that you want to get published on Windows 8 and you need help or you have questions, and I'm happy to try to route you to the right people if I can't help you myself. So I don't think this will be a very long talk, but I've broken it up into 5 parts. And the first one I'll talk about, which is just actually developing for Windows 8. So there's a lot of information out there for how to actually develop for Windows 8. There's a lot of misinformation, too, when it comes for game development. So I'll try to clear up some of that as best I can. The first thing I want to talk about is just this stat that I pulled out. And this is a really old stat. It's from 2012. And, in our industry, even being a year behind stat-wise is pretty old. But what's really interesting is that year over year, we're seeing a 26% rise in gaming. Sorry, this is actually taken from 2011, so it's a little bit older than that, but, I have some other stats talking about it. But gaming is really big on mobile and on tablets. And it's definitely a space not to ignore. It's also a lot more fun to build games than it is to build single-serve utility apps and stuff like that. But, this is really fascinating. I think this really kind of hits home when I notice people like my wife, who is not a gamer at all, but she's constantly fiddling around on her phone and playing some sort of match 3 game or some sort of spelling game. And while she doesn't fit into the usual demographic we talk about for gamers, I think what we're seeing now, and it's something else I've talked a lot about with casual gaming, we're seeing this huge growth now in casual gamers and people who weren't really targeted as gaming demographic, but are now willing to play games, especially when they're sitting there and they're waiting on their phone and they have nothing to do. Especially like in cities like New York, I mean, I'm always playing games on my phone while I'm on the train or on subways and in other places where there's a lot more mass transit. So with that in mind, one of the things that's a big draw is that Windows has a huge reach. And as Windows 8 becomes more prevalent and more people start adopting it, there's a huge potential to actually reach a much larger demographic than you're going to eventually get with mobile. And one of the cool things that, and I'll talk about this as well, is that with Windows 8, it actually reaches to mobile and tablet devices, which are becoming incredibly more popular over desktop computers. But, just to show you, Windows 8, or Windows in general has over, 100 languages. It's all over the world, and it's a huge, huge platform. So with that, I also have some stats that I could share from even the Windows Phone market. And while Windows Phone doesn't have a huge market share right now, we're able to see a lot of pertinent information, though, from the demographic of people who are buying it. One of the things I've noticed a lot with Windows Phone, and I've talked with indies, is that they've actually been able to make money and have a lot less barrier of entry when it comes to people finding and paying for their game as they would have on other platforms. So with that being said, we look at some of these stats that we're pulling from our phone market, and we're seeing that the top free downloads are obviously games. 34% are games, and the top paid downloads, which is a huge 57%, are games. So we're seeing on Windows Phone that people are willing to pay for games and buy these games, and hopefully this is stuff that we'll start seeing a lot on the Windows 8 side as well. So real quick, for those who aren't familiar with Windows 8 or the Windows 8 platform, there's been a huge re-architecting of the underlying system, and everything now sits on top of these core OS services, and there are different layers and different ways to actually access them. And you basically have 3 different languages that you can choose from. Well, technically kind of 4, but you can use C++. If you want to do low-level stuff, you can do C# or a Visual Basic, and then you can do HTML and JavaScript. And it's going to be this third tier, the HTML5 and JavaScript stuff, that is really important, and that's what we'll obviously be talking about. But what I want to show and illustrate here is that JavaScript can actually talk directly to the hardware, and in some cases, even with some of the games that I'm doing and games that I've talked about in the past, I'm actually able to get JavaScript to talk directly to C++ to access stuff like an Xbox controller. So for all intents and purposes, JavaScript and HTML is native on Windows 8, which is a huge boon if you are a web developer and you're looking to take your same skills and build apps with it, or if you want to build games with it. So that being said, I think the other thing just to highlight is in the desktop app side, you'll see that the HTML and JavaScript side sits kind of on top of Internet Explorer. And the big thing to note is that once you have Windows 8 installed on your computer, anything that runs in Internet Explorer 10 is basically going to run the same, if not a little bit faster, on the Windows 8 as a native app, or a Windows Store app as we call it. So that's something important, so that a lot of your debugging and testing can still be done through the browser, which is how I work. And then when I'm done and ready, I can actually package it up and put it into the Windows Store, which I'll go over during this talk. So Windows 8 is really interesting because, like I kind of alluded to, as we're seeing more and more people buying tablets and leaning towards these more mobile devices, Windows 8 actually covers a lot of different form factors. And as a developer, it's also really hard to think about having to support all these different devices. So a lot of thought has to kind of go into that. But luckily, when it comes to games, usually games are full screen and they have custom UIs, and you can do a lot of creative stuff to get around different resolutions, different form factors, especially on Windows where you have to support touch and keyboard and controller input, where you may not have access to all those things on different platforms. And likewise, that stuff can actually be a big boon, especially for games that require a lot better controls. Like maybe you really want people to use an Xbox controller even though they're on a touch device. Well, all the Windows 8 laptops and tablets have USB ports which you can communicate to. So I'll go over each of the form factors so you can understand how they all work and kind of things we need to think about when building games for Windows 8 in general. So traditionally, we talk about desktops, right? When computers started becoming mass marketed and everyone was buying them, they really started buying desktops. Laptops really weren't around or weren't that affordable at the time, and desktops really became the most affordable way of buying a computer. Since Windows 8 can be installed on any computer that runs Windows 7, a huge demographic most likely is going to be people who already have an existing desktop or an existing laptop and are simply upgrading. And then when we talk about these tower computers or these all-in-one computers, they typically have a very powerful video card, they have a really fast CPU, lots of RAM, and their default input is the keyboard and mouse. So, I'll talk a lot about this. Each of these form factors has its own default type of input, and that's where that particular form factor will require your attention to make sure you're at least covering the bases. So keyboard and obviously, any desktop or any of these computers, like I say, can always hook up to a gamepad controller. So the next set of form factors is going to be laptops, non-touch screens. So this is pretty much any laptop that's been created prior to Windows 8. I think most of the Windows 8 laptops now that are coming out, except for maybe the really the lower priced ones, are all going to have some sort of touch screen. So we had to think about it. These are standard laptops. Most of them have slower GPUs and CPUs than desktops, less RAM, and their main input is going to usually be a trackpad plus the keyboard. So if your game is using a mouse, or requires very specific controls with a mouse, you may not have the same level of control as you would with a laptop. So you may require that person to use an external mouse. And I think most people who are playing games, at least the hardcore dedicated ones, usually use some sort of external mouse. But still something to think about, because this is still a limitation of that type of form factor. Then we have laptops with touch screens. So this one's a picture. This is a Dell laptop where the screen will actually rotate over and become a tablet. But a lot of these computers that are coming out, especially the Ultrabooks, all have touch screens and are pretty interesting. I know a lot of people are like, I don't really want a touch screen on my laptop, but I really, really love my MacBook Air. I had an 11-inch MacBook Air, and I used it all the time until Intel sent me a prototype for a Ultrabook that had a touch screen, and I couldn't go back to the Air again because I just got so used to using the touch screen. And plus, for testing, it's really good as well. Again, these are the same kind of processor power that we're seeing from laptops. So they're going to be lower GPUs if they even have a dedicated GPU at all. And for the most part, they perform really well with web games. But now you can actually add touch. And I think on the Lenovo, I have a Lenovo X1, and I was just testing it out today, and I was getting over 10 touch points. So some of these are incredibly powerful, and some of them actually have different form factors. I know Lenovo also has one that's called the Yoga, which will fold over into an easel or flat like a tablet. So there's a lot of variation that are coming in these laptops now. Then we have convertibles. These are the ones that I'm most interested in, and hoping that they evolve and become a lot more functional. But these are really ultra portable tablets, and they dock with the keyboard. And what's cool about these is that you get the best of both worlds, because you get this tablet experience when you want, and then you can dock it into the keyboard, and then you get a laptop experience. Right now, these are kind of lower processor computers, so they have lower CPUs, built-in GPUs, and they come in two flavors. There's Windows 8 and Windows RT. So Windows 8 is the full version of Windows where you can run desktop apps, classic apps, and then Windows RT is just the Windows Store apps. So this is kind of all the new stuff moving forward. And there's also a few companies that are making some pretty interesting products like this. And for the most part, as long as you get one that has a keyboard that's really great, the experience between going from a laptop to a tablet is incredibly seamless. And then the last is going to be tablets and slates. So these are full, just tablet devices. They don't have any docking type of keyboard. The Surface would be the exception, where the Surface actually has a keyboard cover, but it's not really in the same class as the convertibles. And these ones, are just your typical, similar form factor to any Android or iOS tablet that you would see. So that's kind of all the different form factors. And then the next thing is that there's a lot of ways we can actually build games for Windows 8. Like I talked about originally, there's different languages you can use. For here, I'm just going to really focus on the HTML5 side of things. There's some really great frameworks. I mean, we are supporting Unity is coming out, and we support other frameworks that can compile into using C# if you want to use Xamarin. But on the JavaScript side, what's cool about it is that you can actually use any web framework that you normally would use. So one that's not a web-based development tool but is still really powerful is GameMaker. And GameMaker for Windows 8, I think they're actually running a pretty interesting promotion now for people looking for people to build games, and there's a lot of prizes for that. And what's cool about GameMaker is that it'll actually allow you to publish to all different platforms. It's cross-platform, but it allows you to actually export to HTML5. So there's two ways to actually deploy to Windows 8. There's the HTML5, and then there's a native build now. But you can also take that game and publish it back to the web. And the reason I highlight it is because it's still very important for me to take my game and have it on the web, especially in this age of where it's very hard for you to market and get people to find your game. I find that the web is still one of the best places to surface information, or at least let people try out a game. So in that case, I'll put my games online to let people try it, and then I'll push them to the store to actually buy it. So having something like this, which will let you publish maybe even to native, but still gives you the option to publish back to web, is pretty critical. Then there's GameSalad. This is a kind of drag and drop game building tool, and it supports, again, cross-platform. I mean, that's the whole, the dream of HTML5 games is being able to reach cross-platform, and you actually build the games with their tools and can publish it directly to Windows 8. Construct 2 is also another really great drag and drop game making tool, and this again will publish an HTML5 game right to Windows 8. And I've seen some really interesting games come out of it. You're a little limited into what you can do since it is really drag and drop, and you don't get to really write the code yourself. But for people just getting started and want to try to make a game or try to monetize a game on Windows 8, and you don't have a lot of background in gaming or programming, I highly suggest trying this. We've had a lot of success at events using this. So it's something to keep in mind. Then we start getting into specific JavaScript frameworks that can help enable you to build games. So Create.js is a really great one. It's really more of a collection of different frameworks. So what Create.js allows you to do is they have a sprite rendering engine, and they have an animation engine and a sound engine, and you put those all together, and then you wind up coding the glue to make your game. So this is for someone who really knows what they're doing and is looking to kind of micromanage every line of their own code. And then again, all this is built for the web. So from once you take it from the web, you can publish it to Windows 8. Then, of course, there's Impact.js. I've talked about Impact a lot. I wrote a book on it. It's been primarily the framework I've been using over the past a little over a year now, maybe more. And just because it just works kind of everywhere, and it's a really solid game framework, and it's really specialized in doing side scrollers, but there's a lot more you can do with it. So I've had a lot of success with it, and recently was working with Dominic, who wrote the framework, and got him some hardware so that he can test it out. So everything now, the latest version of Impact, works really great on Windows 8, including touch and multi-touch support. So this is probably, for me, this is one of the best game frameworks out there. The only downside is that you have to spend $100 for it. A lot of these other frameworks that are showing earlier all require some sort of fee for development. But, this comes with a level editor, and you're getting a lot for your money. And then you can just do straight JavaScript and Canvas on your own if you have your own game framework, or some of the stuff I've been seeing lately with TypeScript being compiled to JavaScript. So Cut the Rope is a really great example of a game that was ported from iOS to JavaScript, runs really great in the browser, runs really great on Windows 8, and this is just a straight JavaScript and Canvas game. And then finally, stuff like COCOS 2D. These are other frameworks that are out there. COCOS 2D has an HTML5 build. They also have a Windows 8 build. So, there's a lot that you can start doing. So if you're used to using COCOS 2D for iOS, you can use the HTML5 build to export out to Windows 8. So next I'll talk about actually porting a game over to an HTML5 game over to Windows 8. And it's actually pretty easy. The first thing to keep in mind is that, just like other platforms, our tools are all free. So you can get a copy of Visual Studio Express for Windows 8, and that's what we actually do all of our development on. Visual Studio is a really great IDE, and it's really good to actually have free tools for it, and it's really great for JavaScript as well. So I've been using it more and more for just my straight JavaScript development. And once you've downloaded that, of course you need a copy of Windows 8. That's a prerequisite to build for Windows 8. One of the cool things that I do that I'll mention is that even in my workshops and stuff where people come out and don't have a copy of Windows 8, I think one of the powerful things about building an HTML5 game is that you can actually build the game in your own environment or however you feel comfortable with, especially if you're just, for the first time getting used to Windows 8 or doing development for Windows 8. Build the game how you feel comfortable, and then when it's ready, just make sure you're continually testing it on IE10. But then when you're ready, take it, and I'll show you right now how I just simply bring a game over into Visual Studio and hit compile. So that's something else to keep in mind. If you're not ready to take the plunge and install Windows 8 on your computer, at least you can still build an HTML5 game, knowing that you'll be ready at some point to be able to put it over and try to at least get it into the store and start monetizing it. So when it comes to building a JavaScript game for Windows 8 or any JavaScript app, you simply select the Windows Store template for a blank JavaScript project. And from there, you'll see that you'll get this basic template. And Visual Studio has a whole bunch of different templates. There's also all kinds of examples online that you can pull into Visual Studio to show you how to use different parts of Windows 8. But the blank template or the blank project is really just going to give you a CSS folder, an images folder, a JavaScript folder, and a default HTML file. And so that default HTML file is just a regular HTML file that's pulling in JavaScript from the JavaScript folder. And this should look really familiar to anyone who's been building HTML games. You can just simply copy your stuff over, which I'll show you in the next step. The one thing to keep in mind is that there is an app lifecycle that's part of WinJS. WinJS is the library that actually enables JavaScript to communicate to the operating system. And while you may not actually need to use any of this stuff in WinJS, it's proper etiquette to actually play nice within the app lifecycle. So I've highlighted this snippet of code. When you create a project, you'll get a default.js file. And in that default.js file, you'll just have this template. And all it is there's this app reference that you can get. And when it gets activated, there's two places that you can you actually put your code. So the way that I set my games up is this is similar to on page ready or on load or whatever you're using. If you're using PhoneGap, PhoneGap has a very similar concept as well. And what I do is I put the start method for my game in here. So when Windows 8 app loads up and everything is ready and the lifecycle has gone through and started initializing itself, I can actually start my game. I've had games where you can just simply keep it on the HTML page and never use the WinJS stuff. I don't know if there are any problems with that, or it might get a little weird if you leave the game and then come back to it again. But for the most part, it's very simple just to tie this in. And like I said, if you do anything with PhoneGap, this should look very familiar. From there, I just simply take all of the contents of my game. So here is one of my games, Super Resident Raver, and I'm just copying all the files here, and I'm just pasting it right into Visual Studio. And one of the cool things which I learned, of course, after doing this the wrong way for a very long time, I just copy it and then go into Visual Studio itself and just paste it in the project panel versus doing it in the Explorer. So that will actually allow Visual Studio to include all the files. So the one thing you have to keep in mind that when you're building a Windows 8 HTML5 game is that Visual Studio needs to actually include those files in the project, so when you hit compile, it knows what to put in the final build. So by just simply copying it and pasting it directly into the Solution Explorer, you'll get it to automatically include everything. So here's everything in my game, and I also, you may notice at the bottom there's an index.html. So one of the things that I do is when I'm building my game, I always keep it running in a web browser. So before I was using like Apache, and I'd have Apache, so I have all my code sitting inside of my SkyDrive folder, or you can use Dropbox or whatever. And then I have Apache focused on the root directory as my development folder inside of whatever folder I have on my computer. And then from there, I'm able to actually pull up all my projects through the web browser, keep testing them in the web browser, and I also have the same project running in Visual Studio, and then when I'm ready to test it in Windows 8, I just hit compile. Because by default, it'll actually use the default.html file. So I make sure the default HTML file includes the WinJS stuff and the specific stuff for Windows 8 to run the game. And then the index file just has everything I use for the web. And then I'm able to quickly test everything in the web and use some of the tools that I'm normally used to using. Or I can do Visual Studio to test everything out for Windows 8. So either way, I just like to stress that you don't have to totally give up your workflow, especially if you're a web developer. You can use almost the same exact workflow and then just publish when you're ready, because you don't want to be slowed down sometimes by compiling for the app or having to test the app in Windows 8 when you can simply just do it in the browser. And then the last thing I just wanted to show off is that there's an app manifest, and this is similar to any other platform. Once you load up the app manifest, what you'll see is that there's a start page. It's the second field there, and you'll see the start page is just set to default.html, but you can just as easily set that to your index.html if you wanted to keep one single code base for everything. So there's a lot of control here, and there's no other operating system that's actually integrating HTML5 so closely into its core. So, for the most part, as long as, like I said, if it runs in IE, you're going to have no problem getting it running as a native app in Windows 8. And then also you can go through and you can set what landscape, if you want it to be landscape or portrait or any orientation to lock that kind of stuff out. And then finally on that, there really isn't a lot to do additionally to actually get these things ported over. So I have this case study here for this really great game, HEROINE DUSK. It was part of One Game a Month, and it's just a very simple RPG. It's actually geared really well towards being a mobile game since there's not a lot of action, there's not a lot of rendering that needs to happen, and it's mostly turn-based in the sense that you click and move around to where you're going. But I wrote this tutorial, and I jokingly say that getting this game up and running in 10 minutes on Windows 8, but it actually took me about 5 minutes. I think the other 5 minutes was me just setting up a grunt and a Node.js build to automatically generate and clean up the file structure and create a web build automatically. So one of the things that I've been playing around with lately is instead of using Apache, I've been using Node and Grunt. And Grunt is like a task runner, kind of similar to Ant. And what I'll do is I'll have it watch anything inside of my JavaScript folder. So whenever I make a change, it'll package up the whole project and also build out a web deploy for me. And it'll also run the app or run the game locally so I can test it. And it'll do a whole bunch of stuff like minimize the game and or minify the game and optimize it so that when I actually do the publishing to the store, I'm not doing all the source code. I'm taking all of the game files and compressing them into a single JavaScript file. So again, the same stuff that you do for a regular web game, you can simply do here. So this is a really good read. And then also, I followed up this post where I took the same exact code and was able to get it to run on a Windows Phone. So this talk really is just about Windows 8, but Windows Phone also has an HTML5 template, and I was able to take the same exact stuff, just put it into Windows Phone in about 10 minutes as well. So definitely give this a try. And a good thing about this is that the game is open source, so you're able to actually follow along and try it out for yourself if you don't believe me. So now that we have kind of a game in Visual Studio, I'm going to talk about the actual publishing process. And I think this is the most frustrating process for anyone, not just on Windows, but for any platform. Publishing is usually a nightmare, and I think the thing that helps you the most is actually just doing it over and over again and learning the process and educating yourself so that it's less stressful about not knowing what's going to happen and being able to anticipate where problems are going to be. So at a very high level, you have to just register for a developer account. So there's a small fee. I think it's $50. This is on par with everyone else. Everyone else's stores, you have to pay to be a developer. But like I said, the tools are free. And once you're a developer, you're able to actually publish your game and go in and start creating, games in the system. So again, I was talking about the registration fee. So it's $49. The one thing that's really interesting about Windows Store is that there's a different revenue share model than you see on other stores. So traditionally, at least when you start out, it's going to be 70%. But then once you make over $25,000 in revenue, it'll actually go to 80%. So you can actually get more money by selling more games. And, no one else is really doing anything like this. And I think it's a great opportunity, especially considering games are in such high demand on our platform and every platform. So that's something else to consider about, hopefully, to recoup your investment in time and cost into, building a Windows 8 app. So this is the URL for registering. Once you register, you'll get set up with a portal, and the portal you're able to track all the stats and look at the apps that you've published. Also, you'll have to go through just an approval process. So I think if you are an individual, you wind up having to give, you'll get charged a little bit on your credit card, like 2 cents or something, and then you have to go back and just put in what the charge and the item number next to it. And then for companies, which is how I registered for myself, I wound up having to just show my tax ID and do all the normal company stuff. So if you're, incorporated, it's just a standard process you'd see in any other, app store submission process. So I wrote this quick guide for how to publish, and these are the kind of steps you need to keep in mind. So the first thing that you're going to do is reserve your game's name. And then the second is you need to fill out the description and the details and all that stuff that really isn't exciting at all. So I try to highlight this because people kind of get frustrated with having to fill out forms. I know I hate filling out TPS reports, but you still have to kind of do that no matter what, because people need a description and need pictures and all that stuff. So it helps to prep ahead of time. Then once you have all that stuff ready, you can export a build from Visual Studio. Then you validate the app locally, which I'll show how that works. And then finally you submit it for approval, and then once you're approved, it goes into the store. So we'll talk about reserving a name. So I think this is unique to Windows Store, that you actually have to, just like you register a domain name, you have to register a unique name for a game. So even before I start building a game or any app, I'll go in and start filling out names. I think they're good for a year if you don't publish it. So make sure that you go through first off and reserve your name and make sure you're able to get what you want. And then after you reserve a name, you can go in and start filling out your app's details. So, this is standard stuff. You're going to do stuff like payments and whatnot. One of the things that are really cool about Windows Store is that you can actually have trial mode, which no other store really has. So in that case, you can wind up going through and setting up a price and then giving people a trial in it. When you do trial mode, you wind up limiting a few pieces of your game. So like in my case, I don't let people get past the second level in one of my games, and then I tell them to purchase the full game. So once they purchase the full game, they're able to actually see, the whole game. And this is great because you don't have to do a free version of the game and then a paid version of the game. You can actually keep the same code base. So that's something important to keep in mind as well. Once you've filled out the basic app details, you're ready to start uploading it from Visual Studio. So in Visual Studio, you'll go into the store menu and you pick Upload App Package. And from there, you're going to be walked through this wizard. So it's going to create an app package for you, which is a local file. And once that's created for you, it's going to load this tool called the WAC tool. And this is basically the Windows App Certification Kit. And what's interesting about this is that in some stores, you just publish the app and then wait to find out if something fails. But the WAC tool will actually go through and validate that everything is working or that everything fits, a minimum standard before it even gets submitted. And this allows you to go back and actually fix things before it's too late. So once you pass, and of course this happens to every single person, it always passes on the first try. Once you pass, you're able to go into the website and then just simply upload the package that was created for you. So once you have that uploaded, the last thing you need to do is fill out all the details for your game. So there's a description, of course, so there's a 10,000 character limit. And the reason I put this stuff up is so that you can mentally prepare yourself for what you need to actually supply. So get this stuff ready ahead of time. You'll need at least a few keywords to help find it in search. You'll need screenshots. So this native resolution of Windows 8 apps is 1366 by 768. So, or if it's, depending if it's in landscape or portrait. So you'll need a few of these, and you'll actually have to provide captions for each one of the screenshots. So keep that in mind. And then any promotional imagery. So this is stuff that will, if the game gets featured or if it's promoted in other parts of the store. So these are the different sizes for promotional stuff. And then finally, once you submit your app, you'll see this multi-step process, and it walks you through each step of the way, showing you, oh, this is the pre-processing as it's uploading. It's going to take this many days to do this or that. and you basically just wind up going through and seeing each step of the way, and you'll know clearly how much time is left in each step. And then, of course, nothing goes as planned. So what to do when your app fails certification. Now, this is the local certification. Generally, you're going to see something like this. And what happens is that it generates a report for you, which is invaluable because it allows you to go through and see exactly what the problem is. So remember, you can't upload this to the tool unless you actually pass this. So once you go through and you look at this report, it'll show you what aspects were actually failed. And for HTML5 games, it's usually kind of this one single problem that I've seen a lot. I don't know how clearly you can see this over the stream, but the actual error is talking about JavaScript files here that are not encoded properly. And this threw me for a loop when I first got started, but it turns out that any JavaScript file that gets compiled into a Windows 8 app has to be set to UTF-8 encoded. And this is a special type of encoding. And the way that that actually happens is that when you open up the file, so if you're bringing in third-party or JavaScript that's been outside of this project, not created in a Visual Studio project, you need to actually open it up and go to Advanced Save Options and pick this UTF-8 with signature encoding. And it's kind of annoying. One way that I get around this is that I actually have my scripts just generate one minified JavaScript file. So I only have to do this for one time. But this is pretty much the single point of failure I've seen over and over again. So it's just something to keep in mind about saving. And eventually I'm trying to figure out a way to just have a script that will automatically do this for you. But I haven't gotten around to that yet. So again, this is really easy to fix in Visual Studio. And once you do it and you're still working in Visual Studio, it shouldn't be that difficult. You shouldn't have to redo this unless you're doing something like regenerating out that minified JavaScript file. Then on the store side, you're going to wind up, there might be a time where you actually get denied because you don't have something called a privacy policy. This is another really common thing to get your app failed on. This won't actually be discovered on the local, on the WAC tool. This will actually go through submission and then someone will fail the app because of this. And basically what a privacy policy is if your game uses any online communication, you have to clearly state the privacy policy as a flyout panel here in the settings charm. So I have an article here on one of the apps that I built and how to do this. If your game doesn't use any online connection at all, you can actually disable that in the app settings, and then you don't have to have a privacy policy. But I usually put it in just in case. It's really good to have. And then you also have to make sure that the privacy policy is hosted online. So when you're filling out the submission process, it's going to ask for you where this is actually being where it's actually being hosted online. So and then after all of those steps, which really isn't that bad and is really self-explanatory, your game will actually be published to the Windows 8 store and released. And then from there, you can actually have really great details and stats on how your game is doing, what the demographic is, what devices is it being used at. Are you seeing more tablet devices, or are you seeing more desktop devices? Also your ratings and stuff like that. So you're able to quickly gauge what your demographic is for your game and whether you need to change things. For me, it happened where I had a game that was more touch-focused on its controls, and I was seeing a lot of people were using the keyboard, and they weren't really happy with just having to use the mouse on a desktop. So I went back and started adding better support for keyboard for them. So this kind of stuff is pretty invaluable, and it made me take out a lot of the Google Analytics that I usually put in my game, because I found that the statistics that I'm seeing from this were filling a lot of the needs that I needed as a developer to try to figure out what people were using to play my game with. So kind of wrapping up, I want to leave some time for Q&A, but it's really easy to get these games up and running on Windows 8. To help people out, I've been pushing these starter kits that I've been building, so taking my own games and open sourcing them, open sourcing the artwork, and letting people build on them. So these games are all built using Impact.js, so in order to use them, you're going to need a license of Impact.js, but they're actually set up to work directly as a Windows 8 project. So you can just copy these into Visual Studio and work with them immediately. So here's one for my Super JETRIOD game. And I'm working on a new one right now. I put the code up on GitHub, but I'm actually working on a much better build script actually for both of these. So this is for Resident Raver, which is a side-scrolling zombie game. And this one here, like I said, I'm working on a new build script that will actually generate out a Windows 8 and a Windows Phone project as well as a web project. And the goal being, we have a really great platform, whether it's for web using Azure or for Windows 8 or for Windows Phone, and all of these will play nice with HTML5 games. So I'm trying to build stuff that will allow people to actually get the most bang out of their buck and use a single code base to be able to distribute their games however they want. So, keep an eye on this project, and I'll continue to update it over the next few weeks as I finish up these build scripts that allow you to deploy to all these different platforms. And so one of the other things that I like to promote a lot during these talks is the one game a month. I'm running dangerously close to not having a game this month. I'm hoping to rectify that this weekend, but I highly suggest that everyone checks out one game a month. Go online, sign up. I think we're halfway through, so it's 6 months into the year now. So, there's still 6 games that you could possibly build before the end of the year. And, really take the opportunity to use one game a month to build a game that you can publish to Windows 8 and put it in a store and get through that process and actually just learn the process of publishing, because I think that's probably the biggest hurdle that anyone has to get over outside of actually making the game themselves. And if, you want, I created these starter kits for you to actually take a project that's already running and just understand and work through publishing the game. So give them a try, even if you just start out with adding a few levels yourself and tweaking the game and maybe not changing the artwork because you're not good at art. At least you can get the full experience of publishing a game on Windows 8. And then finally, for those of you in the New York area, I do a lot of events throughout the year. The most popular one I've been doing lately is the New York GameMakers meetup. So every Saturday, although it will be slowing down a little bit from the summer because in New York when it's actually warm we like to go outside. But over the next few months, check out this website. What we're doing is basically in the mornings I do beginner classes, and in the afternoons I do advanced classes. And actually this weekend I'm doing a mini game jam. So I'm taking the Super Resident Raver starter kit, and everyone is going to wind up building a single level for the zombie game, and then I'm going to put them all together and then show everyone how to publish that game to the Windows Store. So if you're in the New York area, please come on out. Love to have you out and help make some new games. And so that's my talk. The slides you can find online at the URL at the bottom. And again, check out my website. I have a lot of articles about HTML5 game development, about Windows 8 game development, and pretty soon I'm also going to be talking about Unity and all different frameworks for getting games onto Windows 8. So with that, I'd love to hear any questions and answer as many as I can before we run out of time.
Excellent webcast, Jesse. We do have a couple of questions. One is from James. Why just Windows 8? Shouldn't HTML cross over to iOS and Linux?
Yes. In a lot of my other talks, you can publish, I talk a lot about publishing HTML5 games to every platform. I think the reason I wanted to focus on this talk, outside of working at Microsoft, is that Windows 8 is the easiest platform to actually publish a game to. So all the other platforms, there's some really great solutions, but they all involve third-party wrappers, so either PhoneGap or Cocoon.js or AppMobi. But if you have a web game and you're looking to try to monetize it on a store immediately and not have to deal with a lot of headache of trying to package it up in one of these third-party packagers, Windows Store is a great alternative to give a try to.
Earl also has a question. What does your Windows 8 app developing prototyping setup look like? For example, coding on Windows 7 PC laptop, test using Windows 8 and VM. Does Visual Studio include Windows 8 emulator? Then test on device.
Yes. So in order to do any Windows 8 development, you have to have Windows 8. There is an emulator, which is, or a simulator basically, which is incredibly useful for testing out different resolutions or rotation, stuff like that. But primarily I do all my Windows 8 development on Windows 8. There's kind of no other choice. So outside of that, though, once you have it on Windows 8, you can actually test it locally on your computer, or if you have another Windows 8 device, it's easy to actually publish that game remotely over Wi-Fi to another device. So I'll have a Surface, and I'll push my games out to my Surface and keep developing on my desktop.
Another question came in regarding your book and ImpactJS or Impact.js. Can you run Impact.js on the Mac to build games?
Yeah. So you can run Impact on. I mean, it's an HTML5 game engine. So wherever you develop JavaScript and HTML, you can do it. So you can do it on Linux or Mac. And I think, like I was saying, one of the best-selling points of it is that just build your game. I mean, primarily I'm more interested in people who are just building HTML5 games because I think it's important to, have people doing that. And then once you have that game up and running, then you can easily take that, if you're not running on Windows 8 to begin with, install Windows 8 on a VM or through Boot Camp or whatever, depending if you're using a Mac. And then from there, you can just put it into Visual Studio and publish it.
James has another question. Does Impact.js have a way to try before you buy plan? And does it work for other platforms like iOS or Linux?
Impact doesn't have any try before you buy. I'm going to go ahead and guess here. There's no trial for the framework itself, and then there's no logic really in the framework for monetizing it. That's all kind of up to you. When you start doing stuff no other platform really supports a try before you buy model. So if you're trying to publish it to iOS or to Android, you wind up just doing some sort of free light version and then a paid version. I think the only consistent way across platforms to do that is in-app purchases. So what I think is becoming a more popular way of doing things is to just to offer the game for free and then use in-app purchases to either buy add-ons or to unlock other parts of the game. So even I've been looking at doing that a little bit more on the Windows 8 side because there are two different markets that you can filter games by. There's the paid apps and there's free ones. So people primarily, which I don't understand why because games are so cheap on mobile, but people like free games. So they always tend to go to the free side first. So by doing in-app purchases at least, you wind up always staying in the free market. And then from there, you can just use the same kind of concept to just try the game out and then use in-app purchase to buy more features.
Great. I think that's all we have for Q&A. If there's anything else you'd like to add, then I'll leave time for it. Otherwise, that concludes today's webcast. And if everybody would like to give Jesse a big thank you for presenting to us today. I know I enjoyed it. And just as a reminder, we will have this webcast archive up within 48 hours. And thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you at future events.
Great. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.